We've just got some breaking news in from Buckingham Palace, folks. So this statement has just come in from Buckingham Palace, and I'll read it for you. It goes on to say, His Majesty has today initiated a formal process to remove the style, titles and...
Just 4 minutes ago, a private message reached King Charles and instantly turned an already fragile royal dispute into a deeply personal confrontation. Meghan had not simply asked for permission to return to royal life. She had presented herself under a title directly connected to Princess Diana, a title the palace had deliberately banned from being used by anyone else. Charles read the wording twice, placed the message on the table, and demanded to know who had allowed it to reach the palace. But before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure you subscribe to Royal Zone so you never miss a single update. Charles felt the anger rise before anyone in the room dared to speak. Meghan had spent years outside the working monarchy, yet every suggestion of a return unsettled the royal family. A working royal is a family member who performs official duties on behalf of the crown, and she was now asking to step back toward that world, on terms that reopened very old wounds. The king looked again at the phrase near the top of the request. Diana's royal successor. That ceremonial description had been privately banned because it suggested that one woman could inherit Diana's public identity, her emotional place in the nation's heart, and her influence. To Charles, the wording did not simply challenge palace rules. It turned a dead woman's memory into a bargaining tool during a negotiation over status, access, protection, and power. Meghan's proposal went far beyond a symbolic gesture. She wanted entry to Windsor, a place used for royal residence, ceremonies, and family business. She also asked for a public appearance alongside family members, restored security arrangements, and recognition as the natural continuation of Diana's humanitarian mission. Each demand carried its own risk, but together, they formed something far more dangerous. A route back into royal life built entirely around the one name the monarchy could never treat casually. Charles stood beside the long table and read the page in complete silence. He removed his glasses, placed them beside the message, and fixed his full attention on the waiting aide. "That title will not enter this family," he said. His voice was quiet. The decision was absolute. The monarch ordered palace officials to trace every person who had touched the request. He wanted to know whether Harry had approved the language, whether Meghan had acted entirely alone, and whether someone inside the royal household, the staff and offices supporting the sovereign, had encouraged her. The possibility of help from inside the palace changed the mood in the room immediately. Before any response could be drafted, William received the exact wording. He read the forbidden title, closed the file, and asked to speak to his father immediately. Charles had rejected the words as a monarch, but William was about to confront them as Diana's son. Behind the forbidden title stood 3 people carrying 3 very different versions of the same history. Charles remembered a marriage that had ended in pain and very public judgment. William guarded the memory of a mother whose name had followed him through every single stage of his life. Meghan saw Diana as a symbol of independence, rejection, and survival. When those 3 interpretations collided, the argument was no longer about a return to royal duties. It was about ownership of memory. Charles felt the past pressing hard against the authority he now carried. His relationship with Diana remained one of the most painful chapters in the monarchy's modern history, because every mention of her name reopened questions about love, betrayal, responsibility, and regret. The monarchy was not merely a family. It was an institution led by the sovereign and supported by working relatives. Meghan's use of the forbidden title therefore threatened both the king's private emotions and the public order he was expected to protect. Meghan understood the comparison very differently. She believed that she and Diana had both entered royal life with hope, only to face isolation, hostile headlines, and pressure from traditions that left little room for personal freedom. To her, the title was not theft. It was recognition. Yet Charles heard something much colder inside those words. He heard an attempt to turn suffering into authority, and memory into a bargaining tool. William received the wording while preparing for a scheduled meeting. He reached the phrase, "Diana's royal successor," and his expression changed instantly. The prince dismissed the waiting aide, closed the folder, and remained alone for several minutes. For him, this was not about palace rules. It was a direct intrusion into his mother's identity. He believed her legacy belonged to neither Meghan nor the institution, and he would not allow anyone to use it as a path back to royal power. Harry stood in the most dangerous position of all. He understood why his wife compared herself to Diana, because he had watched Meghan struggle under the same kind of public pressure that had once surrounded his mother. But he also knew how deeply William reacted whenever Diana's name became part of a campaign. The younger brother feared that defending his wife could now be seen as betraying the woman both sons had spent their entire lives protecting. Camilla watched Charles grow more defensive, and quietly warned him against acting too quickly. The Queen Consort told the king during a private conversation that a harsh rejection could transform Meghan's forbidden title into a powerful symbol of resistance. He listened, but his anger did not fade. William was already preparing his own response, and Meghan had no idea that both men were now moving toward the same hard boundary. The forbidden words had not appeared without warning. They had been born during an earlier palace confrontation, where one sentence changed everything and turned private resentment into a royal crisis. The title that enraged Charles had first been spoken months earlier, far from cameras and public ceremonies. It happened during a private planning meeting for a Diana Memorial initiative at Kensington Palace. Meghan had expected her proposal to be welcomed as an act of reconciliation. Instead, she was told that she would never be permitted to represent Diana's legacy in any official royal capacity. The refusal was calm, brief, and devastating, and it became the trigger for everything that followed. Meghan entered that discussion fully convinced that her idea would be difficult to reject. A memorial initiative is a limited royal program created to support causes linked to a deceased family member. This one focused on homelessness, mental health, and vulnerable children. She believed those causes matched the humanitarian work she and Harry had already been doing. To her, participation was not a demand for power. It was a chance to return through genuine service. William understood the proposal very differently. He knew Diana's name could attract attention, donations, and public sympathy. But he also knew how easily that influence could be converted into a personal claim. The prince feared that once one person was presented as the continuation of his mother, Diana's memory would stop being a legacy, and would instead become a position that others could compete to inherit. The closed meeting reached its point of no return, when a senior courtier began reading Meghan's written proposal aloud. The official described her as a possible modern continuation of Diana's compassionate mission. Before the sentence was even finished, William placed one hand flat on the table and stopped him cold. His voice stayed controlled, but the meaning was crystal clear. No living member of this family will be presented as her successor, he said. Not Meghan, not Catherine, not even her sons. Meghan felt that rejection land with more force than anyone else in the room understood. She believed the palace was perfectly willing to use Diana's image publicly, while refusing to let anyone challenge its control over her story. William believed he had just protected his mother from being turned into a royal role that could be awarded, marketed, inherited, or claimed by anyone. Neither moved any closer to the other. The silence hardened between them. Harry heard Meghan's anger later in a private recorded conversation, preserved in their personal account of the meeting. She told him the palace feared her connection with Diana because the comparison gave her influence that did not depend on royal approval. He listened, troubled by her pain, but equally aware of why his brother had drawn the line so firmly. Charles acted soon afterward. The king approved a written restriction banning phrases such as Diana's successor, Diana's heir, and the new Diana. From all official negotiations, invitations, ceremonial descriptions, or royal programs, the instruction was clear, private, and final. Meghan had now used the exact phrase the monarch had personally prohibited. What had begun as a rejected proposal was about to become a face-to-face battle over memory, authority, and the boundary she simply refused to accept. The confrontation took place without cameras, ceremonial uniforms, or prepared speeches. Meghan entered believing she could force the palace into a real discussion about her return. Charles entered determined to end the conversation before the forbidden title could gain any legitimacy. Between them sat a single printed request, with Diana's name on it. For several minutes, neither person touched it. Then Charles pushed the page across the table and asked Meghan directly, why had she used a title he had personally forbidden? Meghan had secured only a restricted private meeting after insisting that her request was about family reconciliation, not a permanent restoration of royal status. A restricted meeting meant the conversation was tightly controlled, with no public ceremony and no promise of official duties. She believed that distinction gave her room to negotiate. Charles believed it removed every possible excuse. The king agreed to hear her because he wanted the truth directly from her. Was the title a calculated demand, or had Meghan used it simply as an emotional description without fully understanding what it meant? She did not hesitate. She told him the phrase reflected survival, courage, and resistance to the same institutional pressure Diana had faced. Charles pointed to the words, Diana's royal successor, and held his voice completely steady. You do not inherit her name because you suffered inside this family, he said. The sentence landed hard. Meghan answered that she was not claiming Diana's identity. She was continuing the same fight, against public cruelty, isolation, and a system that protected itself before it ever protected vulnerable women. The monarch's restraint began to break. When Meghan said the monarchy had repeated the same mistakes it made with Diana, he pushed back with an anger he could no longer hide. He accused her of turning private pain into a weapon, whenever she wanted access, security, influence, or sympathy. She told him that the palace called every challenge manipulation, because it was afraid of losing control. Meghan slid the request back across the table. She refused to remove the title unless the palace agreed to discuss her conditions. Charles did not sit down again. He closed the folder, placed one hand firmly over it, and declared the meeting finished. Then Meghan revealed the part he had not expected. A public version of the proposal had already been prepared. If negotiations failed, the forbidden title could appear beyond palace control, attached to her return campaign, with Diana's name alongside it. Charles warned her that any public use would trigger a formal royal response, an official statement carrying the full authority of the sovereign. It would deny any connection between Meghan's status and Diana's legacy, leaving absolutely no room for private interpretation. The king opened the door and stepped aside. The negotiation was over, but William was waiting on the other side, and he had no intention of allowing Meghan to leave without hearing exactly what Diana's eldest son believed she had done. Charles had ended the negotiation, but the real emotional confrontation was waiting just on the other side of that door. William did not raise his voice when Meghan emerged from the meeting. That made the moment even more unsettling. He stood at the far end of the private corridor, holding no briefing papers and accompanied by no advisor. Meghan stopped when she saw him. For years, their disagreements had been filtered through official statements, media interviews, and other people standing between them. Now Diana's eldest son stood face to face with the woman claiming symbolic succession to his mother's legacy, and there was nothing between them but unresolved history. William carried no crown that day, yet his authority was impossible to ignore. Charles was the reigning monarch, the sovereign who officially led the institution. But the prince held something the palace could neither grant nor remove: the emotional right of a son protecting his mother's name. Meghan also understood another reality clearly. No royal return involving her could ever succeed if William refused family appearances, charitable cooperation, or access to the household he shared with Catherine. The future king told Meghan that he would support no arrangement linking her return to Diana's charities, former residences, ceremonial objects, public memory, or humanitarian work. A ceremonial object is an item used in royal tradition to represent rank, duty, or history, and he refused to let any such symbol become part of her campaign. His words were cold, but the pain beneath them was not. William struggled to keep his voice fully steady. He told her that Diana had been his long before she became a symbol used by supporters, critics, broadcasters, charities, and royal campaigns. He remembered her as a real person, not a title. Meghan listened without stepping back. Then she answered that he did not own Diana's message, or the right to identify with her suffering. She argued that pain did not become exclusive simply because it belonged to a prince. She said the same isolation, pressure, and public cruelty could exist in another woman's life entirely. William did not deny her experience. He denied the conclusion she had drawn from it. The prince told her that shared pain did not give anyone the authority to appoint themselves as Diana's successor, especially while using that claim to negotiate security, access, influence, and status. He said grief could create understanding, but it could not create a royal title. Then William reached toward the folder in Meghan's hand. He removed the palace visitor pass and placed it quietly on a nearby table. The gesture was small, but its meaning was final. The discussion had moved beyond negotiation. She was now being excluded. William revealed that he had already ordered a full review, through a documented palace instruction, covering every foundation, speech, commercial agreement, and public project where Meghan's name might appear alongside Diana's. She looked at him differently then. This was no longer one angry conversation. The entire royal system was beginning to move. By the time Meghan turned to leave, the forbidden title had completely failed to open the palace gates. Instead, it had caused those gates to close more firmly than they ever had before. Within hours, Meghan's request disappeared from the list of matters open for negotiation. Her planned meeting with charitable representatives was cancelled. A proposed visit to Windsor was removed entirely. Security officials were instructed that no appearance could be described as royal, semi-royal, or connected to Diana's historic role. The response was not loud, but it was devastatingly precise. Every path Meghan had hoped to use for a symbolic return was being closed, one administrative decision at a time. Charles authorized a formal palace directive stating that Meghan held no ceremonial, constitutional, or representative connection to Diana's former position. A palace directive is an official instruction issued through the monarch's household, carrying authority across all royal offices and staff. The king also drew a second boundary. Private family contact could continue, but no conversation with Harry would ever reopen official duties, titles, security privileges, or public roles. The consequences arrived quickly. Meghan's proposed Windsor meeting vanished from the calendar. Her commemorative appearance was rejected outright. The security review ended before it had even properly begun, and her request to join the Diana Initiative was removed from all consideration. What she had presented as reconciliation now looked, inside the palace, like a failed attempt to return through emotional pressure. Meghan received the decision in a private sitting room and read the final paragraph twice. She lowered the letter, walked toward the window, and told Harry that the palace had chosen punishment over reconciliation. He heard the genuine pain in her voice, but he also saw a truth neither of them could avoid any longer. William had already drawn this boundary clearly, and the forbidden title had crossed it openly. Harry felt completely trapped between loyalty and memory. He wanted to defend his wife from yet another rejection, Yet he understood why his brother believed Diana's name had been used as leverage. Meghan saw that hesitation immediately. To her, his silence felt like surrender. To him, it felt like the first honest recognition that this crisis could no longer be blamed entirely on palace hostility. Charles felt no victory. After signing the directive, the king remained seated alone, staring at the page he had just approved. He had protected Diana's memory, but he also knew the decision would push his younger son even further away. Authority had solved the institutional problem. It had done absolutely nothing to heal the family. Then the palace uncovered something worse. A media announcement using the forbidden title had already been drafted and quietly shared with a small communications circle. The discovery came through a documented internal briefing, confirming that the phrase was ready to enter the public battle. Meghan now faced one final choice: release the statement and begin an open public war, or withdraw the title and accept that her royal return had failed. Harry asked for one private conversation before she decided. With the institution removed from the room, husband and wife were finally forced to confront what the title had truly cost them. Harry waited until the phone calls stopped and the advisors had left the room. Then he placed Meghan's prepared public statement on the table between them. For once, there was no argument about press strategy, security, palace prejudice, or constitutional power. There were only two people, exhausted by years of conflict. Harry looked at the title attached to his mother's name and admitted what he had been avoiding saying out loud. Defending Meghan did not require him to accept that she had become Diana's successor. Meghan heard those words as a betrayal. For years, Harry had defended the comparisons, because he had seen the same pressure, scrutiny, fear, and isolation in both women's lives. Diana's symbolic position meant the emotional place she held in public memory, not an official office that could legally pass to someone else. Yet the palace confrontation had finally forced him to face the line between sharing her suffering and claiming her identity. Harry told Meghan the phrase had to be removed. He also said the public announcement could not be released. His voice stayed low, but the decision carried the full weight of everything they had already lost. Another statement might wound Charles, deepen William's anger, and turn Diana's name into the center of a battle that neither side could ever truly win. Meghan felt abandoned by the one person she had always believed understood her intention. She insisted the title represented survival, not ambition. Then she asked why Harry had defended the connection for years, only to reject it the moment the palace became furious. To her, his change felt like proof that royal pressure still controlled their choices, from thousands of miles away. Harry did not look away. He told her that Diana's memory had become the battlefield on which every single family disagreement was now fought. Each interview, each rejection, each accusation, each security dispute eventually came back to his mother. He could no longer allow her name to carry another war. Supporting Meghan, he said, had to mean protecting their and not endlessly repeating Diana's tragedy. Meghan reached for the prepared statement. She looked one final time at the forbidden title and slowly tore the first page in half. Harry did not smile or claim victory. He reached across the table and held her hand as the anger between them gave way to something quieter and far more painful. Then Meghan admitted what she had been resisting saying out loud. Part of her desire to return had come from a need to prove that leaving the monarchy had not erased her importance. Harry answered with his own truth. Measuring every wound against Diana's life had kept them both trapped inside a royal story they had always claimed they wanted to escape. Meghan withdrew the title. Harry supported the decision, but the choice had come too late to fully contain the damage. The announcement was stopped inside that room. Yet outside it, Diana's name was already dominating headlines, broadcasts, and the gates of the palace. By morning, the dispute was no longer contained within palace walls. Broadcasters interrupted scheduled programs. Commentators argued fiercely over who had the right to define Diana's legacy. Supporters of Meghan described the rejected title as a symbol of a woman being silenced by royal power. Others saw it as an unforgivable attempt to claim a dead princess's identity. Yet one public moment captured the story more powerfully than any debate. A single handwritten message left outside Kensington Palace. News of the forbidden phrase had spread after fragments of Meghan's rejected proposal reached commentators and editors. Kensington Palace, the royal residence long associated with Diana and now linked to William's household, became the emotional center of the entire argument. The palace answered with a carefully worded statement, declaring that Diana's identity and former position could not be transferred, inherited, assigned, or used during negotiations over royal status. A national newspaper pushed the crisis into something even larger. Its front page appeared almost entirely black, with Diana on one side and Meghan on the other. Between them stood just 5 words in stark, bold type. A legacy, not a title. The message was simple, but it divided readers immediately. Some called it protection. Others called it punishment disguised as respect. Outside Kensington Palace, one woman placed white roses beneath Diana's memorial gate, a public place where people leave flowers and messages to remember someone who has died. Her handwritten card read simply, "Let her be remembered, not replaced." Evening broadcasters repeated that image again and again, until it became the defining symbol of the entire conflict. Meghan's supporters reacted with real anger. They argued that the monarchy still decided which women were allowed to challenge its version of history, and which voices were quietly pushed aside. To them, the rejected title represented far more than personal ambition. It exposed the same old battle between personal truth and royal control. William watched the coverage without any satisfaction. The prince had wanted to protect his mother, yet Diana had once again become the center of a very public war. He saw the flowers, the headlines, and the arguments, and understood that victory could still feel exactly like loss. Charles faced pressure to issue a much harsher response, but the king refused. Through a documented palace briefing, he learned that Meghan had withdrawn the title and stopped the prepared announcement. He decided the palace would acknowledge that withdrawal privately, allowing the crisis to end without publicly humiliating Harry. The public had already chosen sides. Charles chose closure instead. With the world demanding a clear winner and a clear loser, the monarch prepared one final decision, not to reward Meghan, but to permanently close the wound. The public had delivered its judgment in headlines and flowers, but the final verdict still belonged to the family whose pain had created the crisis in the first place. The final decision arrived without ceremony. There would be no restored royal role, no Diana-linked title, no Windsor appearance, and no public campaign of retaliation. Charles signed a short resolution closing Meghan's request, and instructed the palace to end the review once the forbidden wording had been officially withdrawn. The king had begun the crisis in fury, but he ended it with restraint. Diana's memory would be protected, not by handing it to another woman, but by refusing to let anyone possess it at all. Charles permanently rejected Meghan's proposed return under any title, role, or public identity connected to Diana. The resolution was a formal written decision, closing the matter across all royal offices, staff, and future negotiations. It also separated private family contact from official status. Harry could still speak to his father as a son, but no conversation would ever reopen security privileges, ceremonial access, public duties, or royal influence through his mother's name. The king felt no triumph as he read the final page. His anger had never come from royal protocol alone. It came from old guilt, public judgment, and decades of defensiveness surrounding Diana. By refusing a harsher statement, he chose protection. without vengeance. He would defend her memory, but he would not use Meghan's defeat to humiliate Harry before the world. Meghan accepted the truth she had resisted for so long. The forbidden title could not give her the validation she wanted, and it could not prove that leaving the monarchy had failed to erase her importance. Her attempt to force a return had collapsed. Yet withdrawing the public announcement stopped that failure from defining every chapter still ahead of her. Harry finally separated his marriage from his mother's story. Supporting Meghan no longer required him to recreate Diana's struggle, or to treat every royal disagreement as another version of the past. William also secured the boundary he had demanded. The future king had protected his mother from becoming an office that the palace could award, market, or allow another person to claim. Charles closed the last folder and returned his pen to its case. He asked that Diana's name be removed from every document connected to the failed negotiation. No one objected. The request was closed. The review was finished. The decision was complete. Meghan's title had not opened the royal door. It revealed exactly why any return built on comparison, inherited pain, or symbolic pressure could never succeed. Royal roles could change, titles could pass, public loyalties could shift, but personal memory could not be seized as authority. Diana's legacy belonged to none of them alone, not to Meghan, not to Charles, not to William, and not to the palace. It lived in the people she had helped, and in the sons who still carried her loss every single day. The forbidden title was withdrawn. The royal door remained firmly closed, and the battle over who would replace her ended with one final, undeniable truth. No one ever could. There was nothing left to negotiate, nothing left to claim, and no title powerful enough to reopen the door that had finally and permanently closed. Thanks for watching Royal Zone. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel and hit the like button, and we will see you in the very next one.